Shalom, everyone. My name is Tony Pino, and today I'd like to take just a few moments to give you some tips and pointers when someone comes to you and says that Acts chapter 10 and Romans 14 teaches that the kosher food laws of Leviticus 11 have been abolished in the new covenant, because they have not. So you cannot use Acts 10 or 14, and I'm going to show you why. I'm sorry, Romans 14 and Acts chapter 10, but I'm going to show you why you can't use those chapters. All right, so here we are in Acts chapter 10. We are going to start with verse 9. Here we have Peter. He's sitting on the rooftop. He falls into a trance. He sees a vision. We have a white sheet that falls. It has all kinds of four-footed creatures on this sheet, which means animals from the clean list, animals from the unclean list of Leviticus 11. And so then a voice comes to Peter, and it states, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Verse 14. But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." There's your key words right there. And the voice came to him again a second time. "What God has made clean, do not call common." All right, so there's a good focus on the word common. Well, what's the word unclean here? Well, the word unclean is archethartos. Archethartos is used in Leviticus chapter 11 in the Septuagint, and every time it's used, it's from an animal on the unclean list. It points to animals on the unclean list. Now, the word common, that's never used for an animal on the unclean list. No, that's used when it comes to food. Something that has happened to that animal has made it unfit to eat. Common is some type of defilement. It wasn't prepared right. And Jews of the first century had many different rituals. They didn't all agree on what made an animal ritually clean. And so when we see here common, Peter is saying, I have never eaten anything from the clean list that was ritually unfit for me to eat, or from the unclean list. But what is the only word that the Lord has made clean? It says, what God, in verse 15, has made clean, do not call common. In other words, the only animals that Yahweh cleaned up and made pure was that from the unclean list, which had somehow, some way become ritually unclean. He never cleaned up anything from the unclean list. So you cannot use Acts chapter 10 to say that the kosher food laws have been abolished, that now pig and shellfish have been made clean. Absolutely not. That is archethartos, and that was not made clean. And this helps us to make Romans chapter 14 very clear. So let's go ahead and go to Romans 14. Now, in Romans 14, we have another argument over food. Now, is it arguing whether or not something is ritually clean or not? Or is it arguing, hey, we can now start eating pork and shellfish. We can eat things from the unclean list? Well, let's find out. Starting with verse 1. As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despises the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. All right, so is there any clue here to say that we're talking about animals from the clean list or unclean list? No, there's nothing that you can concretely show that he has now made animals from the unclean list clean. Nothing. We have to go down to verse 13. In verse 13, we get our answer. Therefore, let us not pass judgment on one another any longer, but rather decide never to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother. Verse 14. I know and persuaded in the Lord Yeshua that nothing is unclean in itself, but it is unclean for anyone who thinks it is unclean. For if your brother is grieved by what you eat, you are no longer walking in love. All right, so the key words here is unclean. Nothing is unclean in itself, but it is unclean for anyone who thinks it is unclean. Well, the Greek word here is not archethartos. The Greek word here is koinos. And koinos is animals from the clean list when we're talking about food that has somehow become unfit to eat. Well, again, even in Yeshua's community, there were different opinions on what was considered ritually clean, and they didn't all agree. So Paul is trying to say, do not argue over these things. They're not arguing over whether or not to eat something from the unclean list, not at all. They are koinon, arguing over something that has been ritually defiled on the clean list. And even today, we have different opinions within the Torah community on what makes something on the clean list clean and unclean. And so this still applies to us today. But in no way can someone say that the kosher laws have been abolished in the new covenant. Not by Acts 10 and not by Romans 14. Amen. Hope you enjoyed everything. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, send this video around, and shalom.